Hey everyone, Father Jim Martin here. Before we jump into this episode of The Spiritual Life, I want to share an important piece of context. We recorded this episode just before the death of Pope Francis and the election of Pope Leo XIV. Welcome to The Spiritual Life. I'm Father Jim Martin. On this podcast, we reflect on how people experience God in their prayer and in their daily lives. And I am joined by my wonderful producer, Maggie Van Dorn. Maggie, good to be with you.
Yeah, thank you. I love doing this podcast with you, Jim, because we get to go so deep with our guests, but you have a real knack for keeping things light and fun. And in this episode, I think very comical.
Yeah, so I'm really excited that we have one of my favorite people, and I would imagine some of our audience's favorite comedians, Jim Gaffigan. He's really such a nice guy. I've gotten to know him a little bit over the years, and then he was part of this contingent of comedians and comics that went to Rome last year, which was a lot of fun. We'll talk about that in the interview. But why don't you tell our listening audience a little bit more about who he is?
Yes. So if you haven't watched Jim Gaffigan yet, do yourself a favor and look up one of his 11 comedy specials. I think there's at least 5 on Netflix. Jim is a very funny and talented comedian. He's an actor. He's the New York Times bestselling author of 2 books, Dad is Fat and Food, a Love Story. And Jim is often recognized for his real self-deprecating humor. He has some great bits about being Catholic and the father of 5 kids with his wife, Jeannie, who's also a co-writer and co-producer on all of his shows and many projects.
Yeah, and you'll get to just hear some of that self-deprecating humor in our interview coming up. But first, I think we have some questions from our audience.
Yeah, that's right. So we have 2 questions that I think are very similar. I wanted to give airtime to them both. The first is from Dolores, and she asks, how do we find general optimism and peace during these dark times? And the second is from Mary, who says, how do we stay hopeful when everything is so dark right now? So really looking for hope, optimism, and peace.
Yeah, great questions. And I think a lot of us feel that way. Something that I found myself saying to a lot of people during the pandemic was something very simple from Ignatian spirituality, which is that despair is never coming from God, ever, because despair says, nothing can change. It's a dead end. Anytime you use universal words, everything stinks. Nothing's going to change. No one cares for me. We'll never get out of this. That's a sign that you're really moving into despair. My life is the worst. And so I think we have to move away from that into hope, because really hope is the voice that's coming from God. So, where do we find it? Well, part of it is we look around, right? We look around for signs of God's presence. But the hope is sometimes a choice, right? To say, I'm not going to get mired in that. The other thing is it's not unreasonable to be sad or depressed or frustrated or angry.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the whole story. And you can also choose how you respond, right? You can't choose the emotions. I always say, if someone punches you on the face in the subway, you're going to be angry. You can't choose that. But you can choose how you respond. And in these times of darkness, we can choose how we respond, and we can move towards hope, and we can try to be more hopeful in other people's lives too, right? To try to be a good influence. Thank you, Dolores and Mary, for those great questions that I think echo probably a lot of what people in the audience are thinking about.
And if you would like to ask a question to Father Jim, you can write to us at thespirituallife@americamedia.org.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Looking for a simple way to deepen your own spiritual life? Give Us This Day is a great resource that helps Catholics stay rooted in both Scripture and prayer, wherever you are, no matter how busy you are. It features both reliable and relatable spiritual reflections, essays on the lives of the saints, and of course, lots of prayers to accompany you through the day. I'm really honored to be an editorial advisor. I've been that since the very beginning, and I write a monthly essay called Teach Us to Pray. And also, I use Give Us This Day every day, so I'm not just a contributor, but a user. And here's a great offer right now. Listeners of The Spiritual Life can get 10% off their new print subscription. Just visit giveusthisday.org/spirituallife and join the community of Catholics praying together. Again, that's giveusthisday.org/spirituallife. And now on to our interview with Jim Gaffigan. So, Jim Gaffigan, welcome to our studio.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here with you sinners.
and with your spirit.
And with my spirit.
How did you two Jims meet?
Well, I believe we were doing The Odd Couple in Hartford, and I was playing Felix, and he was playing Oscar, and we would switch every night. We would play different roles. No, I don't. I think through my wife. I assume every Catholic connection is my wife, but there's so many different connections. And now Jim's disappointed. He's like, oh my gosh, it was such a special meeting.
That's right. It was actually, we did Waiting for Godot. Remember?
Waiting
and
for
that's
Godot.
That's what we switched off on, and the Times loved it.
The Times loved it.
I think you came in to our show called Faith in Focus. Remember that? We were going to have like a little TV show that didn't really go anywhere. But you were great. You were brilliant.
I do so many Catholic shows.
You are.
I know you guys you're kind of like the NPR or PBS of EWTN, right? Them being kind of mainstream. This is kind of like the Young Turks Catholic channel.
We'll take that.
Yeah.
Now speaking of Catholic, you were
Yes.
raised. I see how I segged
Yes.
so nicely into that.
Yeah, I like it.
Thank you. You were raised Catholic. You identified as agnostic for a while, even though you went to Georgetown, go Hoyas.
Yes.
Yeah. Can you talk about your faith journey?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I should preface this all by saying I feel like a fraud. I am a fraud. I've been going to church off and on my entire life, and still to this day, I am following the crowd when it comes to kneeling or standing in church. I'm like, all right, we're going down. All right, we're going down. Okay.
Is this exclusive to your Catholic faith, or do you feel like you have imposter syndrome in other areas?
Oh, that's a good point. I think I do have imposter syndrome, but particularly I think my faith experience it's such a fluid thing anyway, right? So like you go through moments in your life, like I remember hearing Mother Teresa had doubts. You're like, Mother Teresa had doubts?
Yeah.
I mean, I also really appreciate the notion of mercy. Like that's a pretty important thing. Like the idea that there is forgiveness for these horrible things. So like I was probably in my 30s, 40s when I really moved away from being just the typical cultural American Catholic. And I don't feel any guilt about it. I used to feel guilty, like, oh my gosh, my faith has given me so much and I'm not really in touch with it, whether it's attending church or like my family, we used to do the rosary every night for a while. And then, around my wife's sickness, I feel like we were more in touch with it. And maybe it's a form of rationalization, but I feel as though there is kind of this extended experience where it's like it's going to be imperfect. My experience with my faith or maybe my doubts or my convictions even. I don't know. I guess maybe as a comedian who's kind of even admitting that I'm Catholic, because the Catholics have done some amazing things over the past hundreds and hundreds of years, is that that's enough punk rock anyway. So I don't feel like I have to
be edgier.
Yeah, but I also feel like there, particularly in the entertainment industry, or people that are known as Catholics, I'm not going to be as knowledgeable as Stephen Colbert or have the conviction of Mark Wahlberg. And I look at them and I'm like, it's amazing, but some of it is I don't have Colbert's intellect, or who's got the time? Like, how does he know some of the history? Like, has he read everything?
Well, I would say don't sell yourself short. But also, you were agnostic for a while. I'm curious what kind of brought you back, and when was that?
Yeah, well, I would say I describe it as I lived across from St. Patrick's old cathedral before it was even called a cathedral. It was just called a church. And I lived across from it for 15 years, never went in it. Maybe it was 10 years. And then met my wife on the neighboring block, and then got married in that church. All my children were baptized, confirmed in that church. So, but the evolution, to answer your question, was, I think some of it was becoming apparent, but I think it was much more for me. It was a personal notion of, finding some peace in the notion that there is this notion of grace or mercy, or that someone, even though you've failed multiple times, that God wants you to do better, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, mercy and grace sound like they're very important in your spiritual life. Is that something you came to intellectually, kind of appreciating it, or was it kind of as a result of an experience in your life that you had where you felt mercy or grace or forgiveness?
I think it was self-appointed. Like, I think that, I had gone through my 20s going through therapy and stuff like that. And, my last name in Gaelic means anxious. So I imagine my ancestors were all crazy. And all my children are crazy. So I did some of the work, but there was, something that I had to process and make that asserted decision to kind of embrace this notion of giving up authority in some ways.
You mean your own kind of control? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so it's like, I shouldn't feel guilty for things that, like punishing myself serves no purpose. Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that you don't learn from it, but the whole notion of confession, which again, I don't go to confession that often, but like the whole notion of kind of speaking something, acknowledging it, and having an awareness around it, it doesn't alleviate everything, but it acknowledges it. It's kind of a form of maturity.
So we've heard Jim talk about mercy, and not to put you on the spot, but how does the church understand mercy and the relationship with God? I mean, we obviously think about a merciful God.
Yeah, big question. My favorite two answers come from Thomas Merton, the Trappist monk, and he said God is mercy within mercy within mercy, which I love. It's so beautiful. I mean, and Jesus, for the Christian, if you have a question of what God is like, God the Father, you look at Jesus, right? And you see Jesus as someone who is embodying mercy. Every time he sees someone who's struggling, we read his heart was moved with pity, right? Which was actually deeper in the Hellenistic world as his guts, like he felt it in his guts.
Entrails.
Which I love. The splanknon is the Greek word, just to kind of dazzle everybody.
I think you were ready for this question.
Thank you very much. But the other one that I really like is Jim Keenan, who is a Jesuit priest and moral theologian at Boston College. And he said, I love this. He uses this for both mercy and compassion. Mercy is the willingness to enter into the chaos of another person's life. Isn't that beautiful?
Mm-hmm.
Let me ask you, you alluded to this, as someone who's known for being Catholic. Is that hard in either the comic world or the entertainment world?
I wouldn't say it's hard. It is interesting because among my peers, occasionally someone will curse in front of me and then they'll apologize, which is very, I think, kind of. But in the entertainment industry, it's such a perception industry that it's not like it's not like I've intentionally created this, or they're wrong either, or they're being lazy in their interpretation of you. They've seen me do this stand-up. This is kind of a tangent, but like when I talk about my kids and being a dad, it's like, well, if you are a dad, what else are you supposed to talk about? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I would think it would be weird if I didn't complain about my kids. But I think it's strange to have, because I'm sure I'm considered Catholic because I talk about it, but I feel like a lot of my stand-up, I'm confused by it. I'm not doing this great advocacy, but I also have seen through my stand-up when I talked a lot about even, Hot Pockets, it's like it helped Hot Pockets.
Right.
Yeah.
So when I talk about being Catholic, even if I'm the ignorant, befuddling one, the indirectly, and that wasn't the design behind it, there's a lot of people that are like, yeah, I'm kind of like that too.
Well, or like you're a normal person, and
Yeah.
maybe I'm a normal person too, and so goes the thinking, and so therefore I can be Catholic too. I always wonder, and I'm not talking about any particular joke that you've made, but if you make fun of the church, or is there any, I'm always curious about this, is there any part of you that thinks like, ooh, like I feel guilty, or is it more of a professional thing where you say this is kind of funny and funny is funny?
You know, like there's part of me that wishes I was this great social satirist that was George Carlin, you know, or Raging Against the Machine. But I think that if I've learned from experience that the target has to be me rather than if it's someone else, even if it's this great authority
Sure.
like the Catholic Church, there is something about I'm not an effective messenger. There are people that are very good at that. Like there are comedians that are very good at dirty jokes or whatever, and you have to kind of know what you can do. I would never want it to appear like I'm criticizing someone's belief system, because I think that, you know, we're all trying to get by. So like, you know, if whatever gets you through the night, as long as it doesn't hurt someone else, you know what I mean? But yeah, no, I feel like the Catholics love it, because I think that it's also done in a way where, even when we were doing the Pope thing, because you didn't say this, but there was kind of, when we were asking for names, it's like there's a difference between people that are like that criticize the Catholic Church for the failings that are factual, and then there are people that kind of just take pot shots to take pot shots.
Yeah.
And so there is a fine distinction there, and some of those people are my friends, but like they're not going to be able to look at the grandeur of you know, Vatican City and see that like these human beings were trying to execute these principles that, you know, some Jewish guy in Israel was doing. You know what I mean? They're not going to be able to get beyond that. They're like, sell the paintings,
Sure.
you know?
No, I know.
You know what I mean?
I was going to say, for people that don't know, we had the Pope, and that's a long story, but the Pope invited comedians and comics from all around the world to an audience in June last year. And Jim, among them, came. And Jim also helped me, I guess I can say this, helped me vet the list.
Well, some of it you were asking for names, because I did think that the Pope would want some diversity.
Yeah.
He would want Rami. He would want Tig. He, you know, like, because even people that don't have because some of his message was the light. Because I think Tig's a great example of that. Like her comedy brings a lot of light, you know, and it is not about making someone else feel bad. It's about the humor of it.
What was the whole aim of this gathering? To make the Pope laugh? Or?
No, he's had audiences with different groups of people, different
like
communities.
architects.
Artists, sports people. And I thought this was great. And I wasn't sure how it was going to come off. I thought, is this going to seem strange for the Vatican or pandering in some way? But it was fantastic. And his talk was great. And people really liked it a lot. And it was fun. And obviously there were a lot of funny comments made too.
Yeah. No, it was so cool and so weird, because it was essentially the Pope invited all the kids that misbehaved in church or synagogue or in a mosque, and they were all in this room. And you've got Jimmy Fallon, who's kind of like, I don't know how Jimmy Fallon got through school, because he is so funny and so playful, and he was so excited. He was like a little boy. He's like, I can't believe we're here. Yeah. And so he's like bopping around. It's just like, it was this fun room, and from all these different countries.
Well, he like leapt up about a minute before the Pope came in, and the Swiss guards had just left. And he leapt up and turned around and said like, hey, something like, I guess you're wondering why I called you all here. Everybody laughed. Yeah. And then the Pope's gentleman, the papal gentleman came in. And a friend of mine told me afterwards, if he had done that when the Swiss Guard were there, like leapt up, he would have been taken out. So very good timing on his part as well.
So, Jim, you've written a book, Between Heaven and Mirth, on the role of joy and humor. And Jim, you ooze comedy. So I'm wondering how the both of you think about the role of humor in the spiritual life and maybe even the importance of it.
Wow.
You first.
Me first?
Yeah, you're the professional.
Oh, gosh. I think, well, there is something about the value, and I'm not trying to make it sound like comedians have a job that's more important than itself, but there is something that in these difficult times, and I witnessed it also during the pandemic, there is something about the and like there is the science, maybe it's in your book, of laughter and how it is kind of healing, and the blood pressure goes down and stuff like that, and alleviation of stress. But there's something, I remember I was talking to a comedian, he was like, we were talking about, how stressful, economic times could get. And he goes, we're going to be fine because people will need that.
Yeah.
And not only will they need it, and his point was, if they go to a movie, there's a gamble if the movie's good. If they go to a comedy show of a comedian they know is funny, they know what they're going to get. It was very strange. I know that's different from the question you answered, but like some of it is I don't understand it. I mean, like I sometimes think of like when I'm coming up with stuff or writing stuff, I think of like, Bono used to talk about how when he was writing a song, the Holy Spirit would come in and kind of inspire him. Because like sometimes when a comedian's on stage, they're riffing, but in some ways it's the moment. And the humor some of it is, you could say it's you, but like there is something kind of where it's kind of the improvised element where there is kind of something, I don't know if I want to say spiritual or otherworldly, but like truly organic occurring.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the Spirit is help. If you're helping other people, right? You're helping them laugh. Why wouldn't the Spirit help you? Yeah. I think you're right. In terms of the relief that it gives people, it's very important. I, in the book, also talk a lot about Jesus as having a sense of humor, which we tend to miss out on because we're not first century Judeans or Galileans. And there's lots of stories. If you look at them in the Greek or if you translate them back into Aramaic, I'm not an Aramaic scholar, they're actually funny. So,
could you tell us
one
story?
of my favorite ones is, so he says to the Pharisees, you strain out a gnat and you swallow a camel. And we think, oh, that's kind of a funny, image. Yeah. But in Aramaic, the words for camel and gnat are galma and gamla. So he's making a pun.
It's a pun.
It's a pun. And, scholars say that, people would have remembered that and said, oh, that's pretty funny,
Right.
And some of the stuff that we just don't get, some of his parables, were, according to New Testament scholars, funny, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course,
that's so interesting.
Yeah, and of course he, I think the funniest guy among the apostles, when Nathanael meets Jesus and he finds out he's from Nazareth, he says, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" That's that's a diss on Nazareth. Mm-hmm. And Jesus says, "Now there's a guy without guile. There's a guy I like." And so there's humor there. And then the saints, there's tons of stories about the saints' humor. So one of the things that book tried to do was to remind people that, joy is it's the end point of the Christian life, right? Mm-hmm. As Teilhard said, joy is the most infallible sign of the presence of God. Mm-hmm. But that the saints and Jesus had a sense of humor, and it's natural. It's human. I read a really interesting argument that said that if we think of Jesus as fully human, which we do, to be fully human means to have a sense of humor. Like, what kind of person doesn't have a sense of humor? So we have to posit a Jesus who laughed, even though, he's always portrayed as very dour.
Well, and joy is infectious. Mm-hmm. And so if Jesus is attracting and converting and winning over all these hearts, then of course there should be an element of joy and humor in that too.
Yeah, and his first miracle is to make more booze at a party.
Right.
It's a good one.
And he's constantly talking about the banquet. And you figure, people wouldn't follow someone who is like a cold fish, right?
Yeah.
And he also, when he's doing the preaching and telling the parables, he has to grab people. He has to be, a lot of people say he was almost like a stand-up comic. That doesn't mean everything he said was funny, but he had to get people. He had to grab them. And these are busy people, right? And these are agrarian people who would say, you're boring, I'm leaving. So he has to tell funny stories and be pithy and be there. And so that, I think, shows he must have had this magnetism and also this wit, right? So, and even the way he deals with the Pharisees and the scribes, it's a little bit of, kind of puncturing them a bit.
I think I've heard this quote that's like, what is wit? Telling someone to go to hell, but making sure that they think they're going to enjoy the journey or something that, So
Jesus does that a couple times.
Well, because I also, when you talk about that, that quote, could anything good come from Nazareth, right? Is that, I love about that is that there's an implied intimacy there where indirectly he's saying, you'll understand that I'm joking, but I'm also communicating that I know about that place. And that reminds me of, because among comedians, kind of picking on each other, among men, picking on each other is our way of saying, I love you.
That's interesting.
It's kind of like, oh my gosh, you look 100 years old. And it's like, obviously it's the hyperbole, but there's also, it's like, I know you well enough where I can make fun of you and you'll know that I'm doing it as a sign of affection.
I never thought of that it's kind of a playful move on his part, on Nathaniel's part. The other one I was just thinking of, my New Testament professor, Dan Harrington, said that when Jesus says to Peter, you're the rock on which I'll build my church, he's giving him the name Peter, Cephas, rock. My New Testament professor thought that meant kind of hard-headed, like he's talking about his personality. So Rocky, as my professor would say, that he gives to Peter, is kind of like a joke,
right.
And, James and John, the two people who complain and say, let's call down thunder, he calls them sons of thunder, Oh, wow. And interestingly, in one of the Gospels, it's the mother that says, can you make sure that my sons, have a place in heaven next to you, James and John. And so he calls them sons of thunder. And one of my professors said that maybe he's talking about the mother, like, oh, here come the sons of thunder.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I think there's lots of kind of playful indications of, Jesus' own sense of humor. Let me ask you something. What does it mean for you to live a spiritual life?
Okay, the fraud meter is in full effect.
No.
It goes through different phases, right? Like me today versus me that went with my wife and kids to Medjugorje. It's pretty different, But that being said, I don't know. I mean, let's turn it on you guys. How often do you do this stuff?
No, I so appreciate, Jim, you just candidly acknowledging how much of a fraud you feel like, because, I studied religion in undergrad and then grad school. And then when people ask me, if I'm Catholic today and what that looks like, I also feel like a fraud, and I'm not on stage or, most of the time. So I wonder, Jim, how common is this refrain of I'm a fraud or I'm not doing it right? How often does this come up in spiritual direction?
Oh, with everyone, with every single person.
Yeah.
Yeah, because everyone feels like they fall short.
Yeah.
They tend to look at another person's, what seems like their spiritual life, like, oh, they look so holy.
Yeah.
They're praying all the time. They say, and they know their own sins where they don't know the other person's sinfulness or failing. So I think it's everybody. I mean, I feel like that, sometimes. It's a doorway to humility, though.
Okay.
I think because if you ever say, well, look at me. Look, I mean, this is the kind of person that Jesus rails against, the person who says, oh, I'm so holy and unlike that other person. So I think it's actually the feeling of being a fraud or being an imposter almost in the spiritual life, I think is a good thing because it keeps you from being, spiritual pride. Look how holy I am.
So what do we do with that? How do you advise people who are struggling with a sense of being a fraud? What's kind of like the spiritual antidote?
Well, the Jesuits have a great expression called, we are loved sinners. Okay, so all of us are sinful. And all three of us are here. We're sinful. Everybody's listening. We're all sinful in some way. We're sinners, just like everybody. God loves us nonetheless, right? And so it's that balance. You don't want to be too much on the side of, I'm such a sinner, because then it leads you into despair. I'm a terrible person, right? One spiritual director told me once that guilt is I did a bad thing. Shame is I am a bad person.
Yes.
Right. And so you don't want to be ashamed of who you are. God doesn't love me. So
Right.
by the same token, you can't be all about, I'm perfect and I don't really sin very much. That's
Right.
kind of delusional. So it's
Right.
so I think it helps you to stay in that tension between being loved and being a sinner, which is, it's just human. We were talking about Peter earlier. I mean, one of the things I think that makes Peter the person that Jesus chose to lead his church is because he was very conscious of his sinfulness and his need for God. That's the other thing. You need God. And I know that I'm still sinful. I definitely need God. I was so stressed out this morning about other different things, and I snapped at a number of people in the office, and I have to say, look, I'm not perfect. I need God.
It is interesting because you see it in our society and in our culture, the impracticality of a purity test, right? Whether it be about faith or whether you're, enough of a good father or you're enough of this or that. It's like it never works out. So that's where, when and I'm sure we'll go to church on Easter, and I think in the past I would walk in and I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing here. And now I'll be like, no, that's fine. And so there are those moments in church where it's, even as a parent, you're standing there with your kids. There's no screens. Maybe the priest is not killing it, but there's a moment where you're there with your kid. And that is that's amazing. As a parent that's trying to navigate this, it's even if you look at your teenager and you're like, why are they wearing makeup? You know what I mean?
Now, when you say what do you mean? What's amazing about that? I'm curious.
I think it's that in this age of information constantly being thrown to you, it's almost the stillness of church that is so impractical in our busy lives. But it is, you're sitting next to your child, and it's not even a discussion you're having with your kid. It's not like, okay, we're at dinner. Tomorrow you got to pick up your sports uniform. It's just sitting there. And even if they're, you're not emotionally connecting on what the priest is saying, you're having that silence of just being there. I think there's something very spiritual about that.
Yeah, and you brought up your family. Your wife, we talked about this before, when she was diagnosed with a brain tumor. She's talked a lot about how her faith helped her persevere very movingly. But I'd like to hear from you. What was that experience like for you?
It was a blast. It was a great time.
Terrible.
No, it was, it was pretty earth-shattering. It was on a lot of different levels, and it's provided great comedy. But there's this expectation of, all right, so she has a brain tumor the size of X amount. It was the size of a pear. And, you're reading into how doctors are talking to you, and you're being kind of brave to this, but the odds of us landing in the situation we are today, which is she's fully recovered and fine and all this, were very slim. So that whole experience was a very much of a trial, because it wasn't just losing her. It was about me kind of, being in charge of 5 children. And selfishly, I'm like, all right, now I guess my career's over. Do you know what I mean? Which I say as a joke, but there was part of me that's like, this chapter of my life, because I obviously am not going to, abdicate my responsibility. But it was also kind of this beautiful gift, because it gave me an opportunity to show up for my wife. And as imperfect as I did it, So whenever I meet someone that's dealing with someone who's got a partner that's dealing with illness, I always look at the partner, because there is, so many jobs that you don't consider that a caretaker has to deal with. They have to be the press secretary. They have to be the personal assistant. They have to, also emotionally attempt to get their needs met where it is way down the pecking order. So I guess I viewed it as, in a lot of ways it was this incredible gift, because I did, in this trying, difficult time, get an opportunity to do what I should have done. Not that I imagine, you hear stories about like, someone's spouse gets sick and then they just leave. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. It was difficult.
I'm really curious, where was your faith in all this, and what did it do to your faith, and did it change your understanding of God, and what was going on in your spiritual life around that time?
Well, spiritually, I would say that it was something that you fell back on, right? Out of just there was that scaffolding that you've built through life, right? But spiritually, it was one of those things where, again, I was attempting to kind of navigate how I can support my young children with a lot of assistance from my wife's family, I should point out. So we would do the rosary, for Mom. And so, like, you would think, like, I remember it was the night before Jeannie had her big brain 18-hour surgery. And I was like, all right, so we're all going to pray here, right? And so my son, who was, I don't know how old he was, maybe 5 or 4, it's all a blur at this point, and maybe younger even, we're sitting there doing, the rosary, which has a repetition and a cadence, and so halfway through, my one son goes, "How do you snap? Like, how do you snap? Like, do you snap your like, you think there's this precious moment where he's praying for his mom, but he's a little boy. Sure. He doesn't know what's going on."
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where it's kind of a running joke with me and my kids. Like, how do you snap? Because it was perfectly innocent.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and his older siblings knew what was occurring. Mm-hmm. So, like, even the humor of that moment in this intended moment of spirituality was pretty amazing.
Well, in this kind of intense time for you.
Yes.
But I'm curious, what about your sort of image of God? I mean, sort of interiorly, were you angry at God? Were you relying on God? Were you praying to Jesus? What's going on inside of your...
Yeah, I mean, I was definitely praying a lot, but it wasn't kind of that panic negotiation. Mm-hmm. It was much more of like, asking for like what would be the next right step.
Mm-hmm. I see.
Which I probably should do every day anyway.
Sure, right.
You know what I mean? Because when you deal with someone who's dealing with illness and that caretaker, you really do become a press secretary, and you're kind of navigating different personalities. So like during the pandemic, my wife, we kind of were on lockdown longer than other people because she had been on, as we know, like, or maybe you remember from the pandemic, like once people are on a ventilator once, they really can't go on it again because of some of the weakness and stuff like that. But she had gotten pneumonia afterwards, and so she was on this ventilator. So getting her off the ventilator, there was definitely this thing of like, we got to keep her off the ventilator because some of it is just how the body reacts and stuff like that. There was some of it was like there was not a lot of communication. It's like if she was conscious, she might be writing something, and then it's trying and interpret what she's writing, and then she's annoyed because I'm dumb. I mean, it's kind of a blur.
As you're describing everything that goes into caretaking, it reminds me of the corporal works of mercy, this concept in our Catholic faith of feeding the poor and taking care of the sick or visiting the sick, and this really tangible expression of love.
Yeah.
And I remember once, I think my aunt mentioned that, she felt herself really consumed by motherhood, especially in the beginning, and didn't feel like she had so much time to pray or to have this elevated spiritual life. And the advice given to her I think my priest then was like, but what you're doing every single day when you're doing it with love is such a spiritual life.
Yes, yeah.
So
I like that answer. That's my answer.
Okay, so we're going to turn to the audience question at this portion of the show. This is something we've been hearing a lot about lately, and so I'm going to give 2 questions that are essentially the same question. The first is from Dolores, and she says, how do we find general optimism and peace during these dark times? And then Mary has a very similar version of this question, which is, how do we stay hopeful when everything is so dark right now?
Wow.
Yeah, tough ones.
Wow, I'll take a sip of my holy water.
Right. That's right. Well, I will go while you're drinking your holy water. Our Catholic faith really is, well, I'll just put it this way. I mean, my faith is really centered on the resurrection. And when we think about the disciples hiding behind closed doors on Good Friday and, for part of Holy Saturday, they think nothing good could happen. Mm-hmm. Nothing. It's it. That's it. Mm-hmm. It's done. He's done. We're done. We're probably going to be arrested and killed. And yet, the message of Easter is that hope is stronger than despair. Love is stronger than hate. Life is stronger than death, and nothing's impossible with God. So I think to really hold on to that, and not in a Pollyanna-ish way, but to say this is our faith. I mean, this is what Jesus came to show us. So to look at signs of God's presence in your life, if you're feeling really dark, to look for signs of God's presence, and think about that scaffolding that Jim was talking about. I really do like that image. To see people who are showing God's love to you, but to also remember that you don't want to be like the disciples, who think nothing can change. It's a little bit, Thomas Merton said that despair is a form of pride, which is kind of interesting, and it can make people feel bad. But what he means is, what I think he means, is that despair says, I know that nothing can change.
Right. Like I'm in control.
Yeah,
That's the pity pot.
No, I guess what I mean is, I know that nothing can change, and I know that God can't change anything. So it's kind of arrogant. You're saying God can't change anything, and so it's kind of prideful. Like, who are you to say that God can't change anything? So I really put a lot of my emphasis in my life on the resurrection. So I would also say to Dolores and Mary, look, it's natural. I mean, it's if you're facing a wife who has cancer, or you're facing economic downturn or whatever, it's natural. But it's important for us to remember that Christ is risen. So it's kind of an important message in the church.
Yeah. I think those are brilliant questions, because I think most conscious adults are sitting there going, what if, what if, what if? I heard that question and I just thought of Mr. Rogers, find the good people, right? And I loved what you said about how despair is, there's nothing productive in that, right? So, but that's not to say that it's weird, because as a parent, you want to shake these kids. I mean, you want to hate your kids. No, but you want to shake these kids out of some of these very realistic and fair emotions, and just say, yeah, it does. It is painful. Like, I mean, being a teenager is so hard. But, emotions are direction signs. So, if you're frustrated and angry, then you should do something. Not have the emotion drive you, but, if you're, not satisfied with how things are going. And I feel like we're kind of crippled as a country. We're kind of I don't know what to do. I don't even know if should I watch the news, because that makes me depressed. And so I think that emotions are direction signs.
Yeah. And not to pathologize emotions.
Yeah.
Especially the quote unquote negative ones.
Yeah, it's natural. And during the pandemic, I often said to people that, in Ignatian spirituality, hope is coming from God, despair is not. It's just a dead end. It just leads nowhere. And so to acknowledge it, right, to say that these are real emotions, but to also say we are really called to be people of hope, like it or not.
Wow. That's what we signed up for.
That's right.
Cool.
right. Well, do you want to close us?
I don't know how to close.
I'll close it out.
Yeah, go ahead.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Spiritual Life with Father Jim Martin.
Thanks
SJ.
very much. Thank you, Jim. Thanks for coming in. God bless you and your whole family.
You. Appreciate it.
Isn't he great?
He really is.
He's such a nice guy, and one of the things I like the best is even when he was being, serious about his wife's illness and just his own feelings of being a fraud, there's a kind of lightheartedness there, right? It's just kind of his manner. It's just very upbeat and sunny and friendly, which I loved. He's just, there are really few people out there who are as capable as he is, public figures, of talking about their Catholicism. I mean, he's really good at it, and he really knows his stuff too. And beforehand, we were talking about, different things that are going on in the church, and he really knows his stuff. I mean, he's very well versed.
He is very smart. Why do you suppose that it is so difficult for people who are in the public eye to speak openly of their Catholic faith?
Years and years ago, I did an interview with Helen Alvarez. Helen Alvarez is a pro-life advocate and a lawyer, an attorney, and we did an interview with her. I did an interview with her on pro-life activities, and we were talking about being an attorney and a Catholic, and she said something that I found fascinating, which is one of the prejudices is that if you're a Catholic, I love this, you leave your brain at the door, right? And so I think sometimes people think that in the entertainment world and in the public life that, oh, you're a Catholic? What does that mean? What do you have to do everything the Pope tells you, and you're kind of like an idiot. So I think there's that sense that, you must be a fundamentalist or you must be anti-women or anti-gay. So I think there's that prejudice out there. And I know that that's the case in the entertainment industry. So it's probably hard for him. But he does such a great job. And I think, as he was saying, he's very self-deprecating.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, and he finds funny things about the Mass or the Catholic faith that really just allows other Catholics to laugh and sometimes to laugh at ourselves, too.
Yeah, and I thought, when we asked him, do you ever feel guilty about, telling jokes about the church? Because I think I would, right, if I told a church joke or a Jesus joke or a God joke. I mean, sometimes I do. And his response was, well, I'm usually talking about myself, right?
Yes.
So that kind of, in a sense, insulates him from any of that. I thought that was very humble of him. He's a very down-to-earth guy. And that whole sort of stance that I'm a fraud that's really quite humble.
And relatable.
Yeah.
Right? So many people might feel like a fraud or an imposter at some point in their spiritual journey, especially if I wondered if this was like an element of it too, where, you are in the public eye, you are wearing this Catholic badge, and you're wondering, I would be wondering at least, how other people perceive my practice of faith and whether it's legitimate enough.
Right, and if you're that public.
Right.
I mean, it's a little like that with priests. Like, you must be so holy, Father, I'm nothing like you. And you think, well, I get annoyed and short with people and frustrated, just like everybody else.
But you also make really good jokes.
Yeah, I try, but he probably makes better jokes than I do, Jim Gaffigan. But I do understand that there's a sense of, higher expectation, right?
Yes.
And you have to be kind of a flag bearer, for the Catholic Church. So I think of all the comedians that I think him and Stephen Colbert are the ones that are most sort of firmly identified as not just Catholic, but kind of good Catholics, right? That other Catholics know that they are Catholic, right? And there's a little bit of a burden in that, I think. And to be funny at the same time, that's quite an art.
One of the touch points of this conversation was the relationship between faith and humor and joy. And I mentioned your book, Jim, Between Heaven and Mirth, Why Joy, Humor, and Laughter Are at the Heart of the Spiritual Life. What inspired you to write this book? Yeah,
well, the book came from writing my book, My Life with the Saints, and I kept running across all these stories about saints who were funny, which frankly, before I started writing the book, I didn't really know about. And there are so many stories about funny saints, the famous joke of St. John the 23rd, where he was asked, I'm sure you know, how many people work in the Vatican. Do you know this one?
I don't know this one.
And he said about half of them. So, I actually was on Vatican Radio years ago talking about this book, and I shared on Vatican Radio one of his other jokes, which is someone said to him, "Holy Father, I understand people work in the morning and the Vatican is closed in the afternoon because they have their kind of their rest." He said, "No, people don't work in the morning and the Vatican is closed in the afternoon." And I said this on Vatican Radio, and there was this big pause, and I realized what I had done. And I said, "Oh, of course, not now in the Vatican."
Yeah, this was decades ago.
Yeah, but exactly. But to know that the saints had a sense of humor, and that they were, because they were human, and that Saint Philip Neri was known specifically for his sense of humor, and there are lots of funny stories about him, and even him in relationship with Saint Ignatius. They were contemporaries, and I think that reminds us that we can be joyful and funny and humorous people. Saint Teresa of Avila said, "Lord, deliver me from somber, sour saints."
Yes.
Right. So I think it's just about being human, and I there wasn't a lot written about it, which was a surprise. You can if you go into a Catholic bookstore, or if they even still exist, or online, and look up Catholicism and suffering, how many books are you going to get? Like millions and millions. You look up Catholicism and joy or humor or laughter. So I thought, time to write a book.
Yeah. And there are so many great stories and anecdotes and insights in this book, Jim. So I would encourage everyone to check out Jim's book, Between Heaven and Mirth: Why Joy, Humor, and Laughter Are at the Heart of the Spiritual Life.
Thanks. That's very kind.
Yeah.
Thank you again to Jim Gaffigan, and thanks to all of you who are listening. Thank you, and God bless you.